Hello, I am here in Lightroom and I'm doing some photo editing from a recent trip to San Francisco, going from stuff like that to that, right? How you can go from this to this in just a few easy steps. I'll show you another quick example of something I just did, just getting started, right? We're going to talk about how you can go from this to that. Come on, computer. Work with me to that in just a couple seconds. And I'm also going to move that over there. I'm also going to be taking some requests and ideas. I really don't know what I'm doing in terms of what I'm going to edit. So we're just going to go through. These are the highlights from the trip. So let's do a couple of the most dramatic ones first. So here's one from the Fortune Cookie Factory. So we click over for develop. And one of the first things I like to do is there's always so much detail hiding in the shadows. And of course, for this one, there's not. So we'll bump up the exposure. So there you can clearly see we're working with the Fortune cookies. We're going to bump up the texture a little bit. This is cool. This is how they actually make Fortune cookies. And let's see if I can got a video. It's kind of cool. This has nothing to do with what I'm showing you, but I wanted to show you how they make Fortune. There, I just saw it. Where is it? Fortune Cookie Factory. Come back. Here we go. Check it out. This is the machine they use to make Fortune cookies in San Francisco. See back there? That's squirting the Fortune cookie dough in, and then it cooks it over here. Right? That's it, cooking the Fortune cookies. And then you see it comes out and she pulls the little flat thing off and then she puts it over there. Anyway, back to editing Fortune cookie photos. All right, so here we go. What did that take? Like 2.5 seconds, and we went from that to that. Now, none of these photos from this trip are really that spectacular. And a lot of times when you go out, they don't have to be spectacular, right? It's just making the best with what is in front of you. And, I like to go on sunset photo sessions here in Santa Cruz, and I like to, chase the setting sun along the Pacific coast and wait for the light to be perfect. But you know what? This time I was with my kids, and I was just grateful that I had an opportunity to make any photos whatsoever. So this is a neat trick. I like to use a vignetting over there. I like to pump up the contrast a little bit. Maybe we'll give it a little more vibrance, maybe a little more clarity, maybe a little more exposure. We don't want to overdo it. Highlights down, right? So for instance, here, when I was making this photo, my kids were very afraid that I was standing in the middle of the tracks when the streetcar was coming. So I had 2.5 seconds to make this photo. I couldn't wait for the cars to not be there. I had to just do it. I had to just make the photo. So let's see, what else do we have? What other ones am I most excited about that can show you? Yeah, here's my darling son Bodhi on the escalator. So what would I do with this? Let's see. Again, I'll just pop up the shadows, pop up the exposure a little bit. And then because I'm blowing out the exposure, I can bring down the highlights to get some of that out, bring up the texture a little bit. And then if I really wanted to call attention to Bodhi, I could click over here to the circle and I can get a brush and I can just brush over Bodhi. See how he's getting a little bit red there? And then I can just bump up the exposure a little bit on Bodhi. I don't want to do it too much. I don't want to overdo it. So there we go. So that's how the image started. And that's where we wind up. So let's close out of that. Go back to the library. Any requests here and seeing what I'm working with? This is another cool example. Right? I totally misexposed this, underexposed it. So does that have to mean that the photo is done forever? No. Well, first of all, we can decide what we want to do. Is it just going to be a silhouette? Maybe. Right? Are we going to bring down the shadows and bump up the exposure? So it's just something like that. Kind of cool. That's not quite where I was thinking we would go. I would like to bump up the shadows, bump up the exposure. Ooh, too much. Bring it down. Throw down the highlights. Bump up the texture. Ooh, whoa, I just accidentally straightened it. That's cool too. We can crop it so that it's actually more straight. No, I don't know. I kind of liked it originally. Yeah, not my favorite picture. I'm not going to spend any more time on it, but you can see how quickly it was that we were able to change it. Here we go. What should we do? I like when I'm in a city, I like to focus on a lot of different architectural features, but big building, the big building, of course, but then also just windows and facades are always cool, right? Like, look at this beautiful detail here. This is clearly an older building where they took the time to do that stonework on the building. Bump up the texture a little bit, maybe give it a little more vibrance. And then I might go down and give it a little vignetting around the corners. But here too, it's clearly much brighter on one side than the other. So I might take my brush and, as Bob Ross would say, I'm making some happy little brush strokes over here. And then what can we do? We'll bump up the exposure a little bit on that. Ooh, too much. But you could also have some fun and make it seem like it was, a little bit more. Okay, I kind of like that. So what do? We went from that to that. What else? What else do we like? Here we go. What can we do with this one? This is a crazy busy street. This is in Chinatown. There's so much going on there, which is kind of what I like. I like the chaos of it, the chaos of a city, the hustle and the bustle. So first, let's bump up the shadows. Anything hiding in the shadows? No, not necessarily. Bump up the exposure, do some texture, bring down the highlights, maybe give it a little clarity. Still pretty busy, but it's almost like up here, I kind of like that it's showing that it's going off into the water, but what can we do with a little cropping, right? Like maybe we don't need everything. Maybe we can crop in. I don't know. It's an experiment. We're just playing. And that's the fun thing too about about taking things into the digital darkroom is you get to do whatever it is you want. Is that better? Is that better than it was before? Maybe. I don't know. It definitely needs a vignette to draw the eye in. Let me know as you're watching this. Let me know if you have any ideas. I'm on live on all of my different social media channels. And if you have any ideas, drop it into the chat. I can see it on my other monitor as I work through this. But just, again, from start to finish. Not everything has to be some big, gigantic, where's my film strip? Some big, gigantic change. No, tools. Hide that. Oh, there it is. No, not opening music. Force code. So does that stay? Okay, so let's see. Let's just kind of go through some more. Here we go. The Palace. I always like this sort of looking down, especially in downtown areas when you've got buildings on both sides and buildings in front, and it's just a wall of windows. Those are always very interesting subjects to photograph when you're in a city. A little extra texture. There you go. This one could definitely use a little brightness bump, a little shadows up, a little highlights down, a little texture over, maybe a little extra clarity, maybe a little bit of extra warmth. All right, so you see in like 5 seconds, we went from this flat picture to that. That's more indicative of what the scene actually was. What's next? All right, this is the one that we started with. I'm so grateful for this computer that continues to hang on. This MacBook Pro is almost 10 years old, and it's still able to handle these 50 megabyte raw files. And that's something else important too, right? If you're photographing and you have the capability to shoot in raw, always shoot in raw, because it's going to give you so many more opportunities for all the things that are hiding in the highlights and in the shadows. So many of these edits that I make, I'm able to make because I shot it in raw originally. Meh, don't love this one. I still like that one, but I would love it so much more if this car wasn't there, if that 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 car wasn't there. Come on, cars. There we go. Just some classic signs in Chinatown. Let's bump it up. I'll highlight down with some highlights, give it a little extra contrast, give it some extra texture, give it a little clarity, give it a little extra vibrance. Dun, 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 dun. See what? Are you starting to see? If you've been watching this for a little while, are you starting to see what my general go-to workflow is? Bumping up the exposure, bumping up the contrast, lowering the highlights, up in the shadows, up in the texture, sometimes the clarity. Boom, that one's done. What's next? Yeah, we got some lanterns here. Again, this is also a prime example too of ideally I would love to, while I'm actually out there traveling, to be able to take the time to set my exposures, to figure everything out, to make a perfect picture so I don't even need to use Lightroom. And I'm a dad of 2 young kids. And like I said, I was with my kids, and I am just infinitely grateful that I even had my DSLR with me, and then I had the opportunity to keep it on auto and let the camera figure out what's the best setting to use, and then play with it later here with you live. So if you're watching live, do me a favor, drop the hashtag live. Let me know where you're watching from. If you're watching on replay, hashtag replay. Let me know where you're watching from. All those things will help the algorithm show this to more people, which is fun because I love sharing my art. This was a boba tea place in San Francisco that had below average boba tea, namely because it was so mind-bogglingly sweet that my 2 young kids didn't even want to touch it. That should tell you something about the sweetness of the boba tea when a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old who freaking love boba, love sugar, didn't want to touch it. All right, so this one, what do we think? I feel like it needs a crop. I feel like there's too much going on that side. We might be better off putting this. Yeah, definitely. So there was the original. And that's what we wound up with. All right, what's next? Here's some more signs for you. So there's always also, the camera has a difficult time when there's dark darks and light lights. So that's another reason to always expose for the highlights, because if these walls are blown out, I'm probably not getting it back. But if the walls are underexposed and you are underexposed, you can always increase the exposure and then pull it down to get some of that detail back with the highlights. Again, we're going to put some texture in. I'm probably going to make it even a little bit brighter, give it a little clarity, bump up the vibrance, bump up the jam, bump it up. Don't mind me. It's 10:30 at night, and I just put the kids to bed, and I'm got a whole bunch of work to do, and I don't want to do it. I just want to edit some photos, so I'm straightening those out. This is cool too. So I don't know if you can see it in here. There's something called chromatic aberration that a lot of cameras get. It's these like little, red and blue outlines. So watch this area above the window. When I click remove chromatic aberration, it kind of goes away. Before, see how it's like bright red and pink? After, watch it right there. There it goes. See how that was cool? And then again, original, edited. Woohoo! What's your biggest takeaway as you're watching this? Is this something you do? How do you edit your photos? Because I'm using Adobe Lightroom. You could do this in Photoshop. I used Photoshop for years. I was a total Photoshop snob. I thought Lightroom was I'll be honest, I thought Lightroom was for amateurs and for people who didn't take photography seriously. And I have totally in every way changed that limited belief and limited perspective, because Lightroom is amazing and it can do pretty much everything that I need it to do super duper easily from one place, just using these handy dandy sliders. Right? Before, after, right? A photo becomes full of life. So I'm going to bump down those highlights a little bit. I might have overdone it. And I fully admit, like, I'm overdoing some of these things. I don't love that one at all. Bye-bye. The tourist store with the mugs. Now, I don't want to bump up my shadows too much because it's nice having some of these things in the shadows, but I definitely want some texture. I definitely want some clarity. I'm going to bump down my highlights. I want to give myself some extra vibrance. I want to give my contrast. And I really want to go down to effects and add a vignette because I want to just draw the eye into this. So here's something else that we could do. I honestly think that this San Francisco mug over here in its bright hot pink is very distracting from the eyes. So I'm going to grab my brush. I'm just going to select San Francisco and I am going to bring down the saturation of the mug. And maybe bring down some of the highlights. Bring down some of the whites. I don't want to overdo it. Take away some of the contrast. Okay. And then I can take away some of the clarity. So it just looks like it's blurred out. So that was a little more advanced, but here we go. We started here and we wound up here. Minor changes make a big difference. I did this one already. Did I do this one already? Maybe not. This is another one I love, just like the contrasting, like we're building, wow, so much exposure, where buildings intersect and where the lines of the two different styles of building just intersect with each other and come together. Like that's so much of what makes a city and a downtown. Also, I found very interesting on this trip to San Francisco with my kids, I grew up in New York City and I've always prided myself on loving cities and wanting to be in cities. And I moved to San Francisco with my wife in 2009, and I was coming pretty much straight from the East Coast. And I had this need to go and stand downtown in the heart of downtown San Francisco and just stand there as the world, the fast-paced financial district world, moved around me, just to feel alive in many ways. And on this trip now, I came to realize I've lived now in Santa Cruz, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, surrounded by redwoods and the beach for 7 years now, that I just don't crave that anymore. And if anything, I was happy to get out of San Francisco when it was done. It was a lot. It was a lot for my nervous system. It was a lot for my senses. And I was just happy to be back, to be back home in Santa Cruz, to be in the mountains, to be with my kids. I was with my kids the whole time, but to just allow that to be, that just because I identified myself for so long as a New Yorker, it doesn't mean that has to be my identity anymore. Even though I will forever be a New Yorker, and I love that I grew up in New York. Okay, so here's something else too. You see this little line over here? That's a little bit of speck of dust or hair or something that's on my lens. So I go over here to the brush tool and I can get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this bird. I'm going to get rid of this little line that's coming over here. I'm going to get rid of this extra antenna. It's your photo, right? You get to do whatever you want with it. But here's the thing, like, if you've been watching this for a while, and thank you to everybody who has been, none of these, in my opinion, are particularly spectacular photos, but they do represent a fun day in San Francisco when I went out with my DSLR, and I'm more likely to be excited to share them on Facebook and to share them with friends and family having taken the extra little bit of time to have some fun in the digital darkroom and play with it, because they do get better, right? Just because you don't have perfect lighting, just because you don't have perfect environment, just because you're with the kids and you're being rushed and your camera's on auto instead of manual and you're not in the perfect golden hour and you're not any of these things, it doesn't mean you can't still have a ton of fun making photos, make the best photo you can, and then have fun in the digital darkroom. How does that resonate with you? Right? Before, after. Here we go. Here's the top of the Transamerica building. I like this. This is one of my signature shots too. Just the tops of buildings, tops of skyscrapers floating in the air. See, I got my dust spots. Let me go get that dust spot off. What else? Contrast. Cool. That one's done. Minor changes before, after. This is the one earlier that we did of my son Bodhi in the subway. That's right there. Right? Before, after. We played around with this one before. Not going to keep going with that. I already got my streetcar one. I don't need to play around with that. Oh, this is cool. The end of the day sun was just reflecting incredibly on this building. So I had to expose for extra dark so that the highlights wouldn't be completely blown out. But let's see now, if I up the shadows, I up the exposure, I down the highlights quite a bit, I give it more contrast. I'm going to take my spot tool and get rid of that dust on there. And then I'm going to take my rotate tool so that I can straighten something out. What wants to be straight here? And I want to have something that's straight. Here we go. A little extra texture. So that's how we started. And that's how we finished. And if I really wanted to, and I don't really want to, I could go in. I'm just going to show you. And I could take my brush and I could, bring out a little bit more of this. Let's see. I said I don't want to, and here I am doing it. So let's just see what happens. Right? And I can just bump up the shadows on that. I can just bump up the exposure on that. I can increase the contrast on that. I can change the color balance a little bit. Right? So that's what it was before. And that's what it is now. Let's say, yeah, I don't know that I love it. I don't know that I love it, but maybe there's a little middle ground in there, a little less yellow. Anyway, moving on. I could play all day. Come on, computer. You got this. You got this. All right, a couple more. I'll do the other one. This was the view from our hotel, this beautiful old building. That's a cool building in downtown. Let's play with that for a second. Again, I'm taking requests. Anybody have any requests? What should I do with this? Should I just blow the highlights out completely? We can make it abstract. We can play with the tone curve, right? It doesn't even have to be a realistic, photorealistic thing. Like a photo is just the starting point these days with digital technology. What do you want to do with it? How do you want to reimagine the scene? That's what gets to be so fun. Like, that's kind of cool right there. What else can we do? We'll have this one just be an abstract work of art. We'll bump the shadows. We'll increase the contrast. We'll bring down the highlights. We'll blow the texture up. We'll blow the contrast. Oh, well, why not? Give it some extra vibrance. Maybe that's too much vibrance. We'll make it add some yellow to it. What do we think? How do we feel about that? Yep, we got to get rid of our erroneous dust spots. Bye-bye dust. All right, so here, this will be a dramatic shift for you. We went from this to this. And this to me is really, I like to say digital photographic art. This is digital photographic art because you can do whatever you want. You can have so much fun and take whatever creative licenses you want because who cares? You're a creative person. If you're watching this video, you enjoy being creative. You enjoy playing around and shaping your reality around you and re-envisioning the world through the lens and through the scene that you want it to be. So do whatever you want. If you want to have some crazy blown out building, you go ahead and you do that. But for this one, right, we just quickly went from that to that. What's next? Here we go, a little end of the day. This building on the right is the newest building in San Francisco, the newest skyscraper in San Francisco, the Transamerica building. No, Transamerica building is the Pyramid building. This one is the Salesforce building. So I wish there was like some nice end of day sunlight or something other than these blue clouds, but there's not. But let's see. What if we just make it a little bit more, a little warmer? That's too warm. We'll make it a little bit more warm. We can bump up some contrast. We can give it a little more vibrance. Here we go. Before, after. If anything, that's probably a little bit too much. So we're going to take some of this. Whoa, what did I do? Let's get that back to 0. And we'll take down a little bit of that. All right, that one's done. Let's go next. Then the next day we went to Fisherman's Wharf with the sea lions. Oh, they're so smelly and so noisy and so cool. The kids loved seeing them. You ever see a sea lion? Oh yeah, so look at this one. Watch the texture. Here's what did I do? Undo. Here's a great example of what texture and clarity do, right? So like look at the detail on the sea lion. This is at base, and it gives it all this extra detail and contrast. So we just quickly went from that to that. So it's just a matter of what do you prefer? Do you like the mystery of what's hiding in the shadows? For me, I like to bump up shadows. Here we have Alcatraz, just the middle of the day, right? Like this is what we were talking about before. You go somewhere and you're not there on a photography trip and you don't have all the time in the world to make the perfect photo and wait for the end of the day light and the golden hour and all that. You get the best possible shot you can and then you play with it later. And so in this case, that's the best possible shot I could get. But we can go from this and give it a little bit extra. Maybe we want to go in and I used to love when I was a kid, I still love it, that movie The Rock with Sean Connery. Welcome to the Rock, where he was a former, basically he was like James Bond, an old James Bond escaping from Alcatraz with Nicolas Cage. All right, so then do we want to crop this, right? Does it need to have all that in it? Would it be better off as a panorama potentially? I think it probably would be. What do we think? Yeah, definitely. So we went from that to that. Here we go. This is one of the first ones I showed you in this little adventure. We started out here. We wound up here. And here's the final photo. Just a reflection of a boat in the water. So those highlights are already blown out. So what I'm going to want to do here, because I want to get a little bit of something on the side of the boat, is I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to use my brush. I'm going to bump up the exposure just over there. I'm going to give it a little bit more yellow so it looks more natural. I'm going to give it a little extra contrast. I'm not going to do that over there because that would be a lot. So see, we went from this to this. And that's it, my dear friends. Thank you to everybody who watched live, who watched on replay. Again, to help the robot show this to more people, we might as well just drop a hashtag replay or a hashtag live into the comments. Let me know how you caught this. Let me know your biggest takeaway. And, if you're watching this on replay or anything, and you have any requests of what I do, what I edit, let me know. I am always up for taking requests. I'm going to do one last look through, and then I'm probably going to post these on my website, adventuresofagoodman.com, along with this video. Honestly, tomorrow I'll probably wake up and I'll be like, oh my God, I wish I had done this differently. And that's the thing, my dear friend, and this is going to be my parting statement for you is embrace imperfection. Especially as creative people, you know it, right? You can always want to do better. You always see the imperfections in your own art, in your own work. But guess what? You are your own harshest critic. So just embrace what you've done, love it, see it for what it is, and know that nobody really cares except you. Unless you're Ansel Adams, you're a world famous photographer, you're submitting some photo to a competition, you're going to share it on social media, right? People are going to look at it for a couple of minutes, a couple seconds, and then that's going to be it. So just enjoy the process and don't worry about what it looks like. Right? Or not, don't worry about what it looks like, right? But don't obsess over making it perfect. And so now I'm going to end by showing you this cool video compilation I made of our time in San Francisco, as soon as I can find it. Here's me and my son Bodie. Here we go. There you have it. That was my time in San Francisco. Thank you for watching. I love you. Amazing. Have a creative, awesome rest of your day. Bye-bye now.